series focuses on climatic change, with our goal being to educate the Missoula community on global warming, the science, the policy, and the technological solutions through the voices and perspectives of leading experts. So last week's lecture by Dr. Running and Dr. Heinch provided us with a primer on the science and implications of climatic change, and tonight's lecture by Guy Dauncey will focus on the rapidly approaching peak in oil supply. And rather than taking a doomsday perspective, he takes a very fresh perspective, and he predicts that the peak will be marked by a multitude of solutions that will allow humanity to enter a whole new era of sustainable energy security. So Guy Dauncey is a visionary activist, and he's an author. He's the president of the British Columbia Sustainable Energy Association, and also the author of this great book, Stormy Weather: 101 Solutions to Global Climate Change, and they're available for sale over there if you want to get a copy. And Guy assured me when we spoke on the phone that we're all going to leave this lecture inspired by the multitude of options that we currently have at our fingertips to combat greenhouse production, as well as gracefully move past the coming peak in oil production. So prepare yourself for an uplifting talk about an issue that often leaves us feeling downtrodden and rather pessimistic. With no further ado, help me welcome Guy Dauncey.
So good evening. My name is Guy Dauncey, and I say welcome also to our listeners on National Public Radio. My accent is English. I came out from England to Canada in 1990, and I live in Victoria, British Columbia. And this is my first time in Missoula, and I just love what I've seen so far. What I'm going to do this evening is take you through an hour's presentation, which will really explore some fascinating things that are in the present moment and on the horizon. And then we'll have a good 40 minutes for discussion and questions after that. So the presentation is called The Sun and the Moon: Sustainable Energy Solutions to Global Warming at the End of the Age of Oil. And basically, we have a combination of two colliding forces. The first of them is global climate change itself. And I shan't go into great details on this because this was covered in last week's lecture. But the fossil fuels that were laid down by nature over millions of years, we are burning in a quick 200-year period. All of our factories, all of the flights we do, all the cars and trucks we run, they all produce CO2. And it's very simple physics. CO2 traps heat in the atmosphere. And when we measure the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, we see that they're just steadily rising. The fascinating thing is that they rise every fall and they fall every spring, because every fall, as all the leaves drop to the ground and they rot, nature breathes out carbon dioxide, and every spring it breathes in, and so they fall a bit, because there's much more treed and greened up area in the north of the planet than there is in the south. Put this together and you see that the climate change situation has risen so that from a basis of 280 parts per million of CO2 in the pre-industrial age, we're now up to 379 parts per million. To put this in perspective, we're heading towards a doubling of CO2 emissions at 560 parts per million by about 2095. And the last time we were at that level was 55 million years ago, and the Arctic was tropical. There are sort of fossilized remnants of crocodiles found on Ellesmere Island in the Arctic. So we know that when we have that high a level of CO2, the whole Arctic melts down and becomes tropical. So linked with the rising number of emissions, and CO2 is just one of them, but there are others I shan't go into, we have rising temperature. And the scientists have not found any explanation for the rising temperature apart from human activity. They've looked at solar variation, they've looked at all the other factors, and they're saying, no, it is human intervention that's doing this. And so Tim Barnett from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography said just a couple of months ago, he said, the debate about whether or not there is a global warming signal here and now is over, at least for rational people. And we've got to it's only in North America that there is a debate about the science of climate change. Really, you go to Europe and anywhere else in the world, this is like saying, is the world flat or is it round? And we've moved on, the world is round, there is climate change, it is for real. And towards the end of the lecture, I'll come into some of the reasons why we have that strange debate still going on here in North America. Here in Montana, Glacier National Park, back in 1850, had 150 glaciers. in this year it's got 50 only because of the melting. By 2030, they're all scheduled to be gone. So you're going to have to rename the park. Like, was once Glacier National Park, or Melted Glacier National Park, or something like that. And you can see how it's the general heat that is simply melting ice. And it's on our planet, we can either burn fossil fuels or we can have polar bears. We can't have both. They're a biological contradiction. Fossil fuels melt ice, and polar bears need ice. And it's very simple and stunning as it comes as that, because the polar bears depend on the ice for their hunting. When the ice is melted in the summer, they hang out on dry land and they don't eat at all. As soon as the ice comes back, they're back on the ice looking for ringed seals. Hunt, 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 building up as much fat as possible. For every week that there's a delay in the ice returning because of the warming temperature up there, the mother bears lose 10 kilograms of fat. And so they're less able to bring their babies forward, and we're looking towards, them starving to death and then just having nowhere to eat at all. So we're looking towards extinction for the whole polar bear population. And the polar bears are just one endemic symbol of this whole thing. Because in February of 2004, a whole team of biologists at Leeds University looked at the impact of rising temperatures on species around the planet. And they said, on average, with the current predicted rises in temperature, by the year 2050, a quarter of all land-based animals and plants will be facing extinction. So this is the dramatic choice we've got to look at. We can either choose to carry on burning fossil fuels because, like, why the heck and why should someone take my big car away from me and it's fun and I love driving fast, or realize that the price for that is a quarter of all land-based animals and plants. It's almost too much to... I can, as a mammal, I can relate to polar bears. I can look in the eyes and see a polar bear. My brain is not geared to understand what a quarter of all land-based animals and plants mean. That's 1 million species will go extinct purely because we choose to go on burning fossil fuels. So this is an image of London, with water up to, people's waist. And I'm saying it's not a joke, because the last global climate change report that came out in 2001 with the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, said that sea levels will rise by 1 meter by the year 2100. And that's premised on mostly the fact that water expands as it grows warmer. And so this rises because of expanding water, plus melting glaciers. So some of the Glacier National Park ice is now in the ocean. But in February of this year, the scientists met again in Exeter. Prime Minister Tony Blair called them together to say, what's the state of the science? And they were ringing the alarm bells very seriously, because they said, we now got to look at the melting of the Greenland ice cap and the melting of the West Antarctic ice cap, and we've got a potential for 15 meters of sea level rise with those two ice caps taken together. We're talking Greenland is 9,000 meters of ice above sea level, 9,000 feet above sea level. Huge amount of ice locked up there. And this is over 1,000 years. It's not in our lifetime. But once this process catches hold, we don't have any means of turning it back. It gets a grip. And so here we have a cartoon of a bunch of politicians doing clearly what looks like the White House, saying, gentlemen, it's time we gave some serious thought to the effects of global warming, and they're paddling in their ankles in water on the second floor of the White House. So I put this book together 3 years ago because all of the publications on climate change were dealing with the science, and they were hard to get hold of, and they were academic, and no one was looking at the solutions. So the book basically takes a very solid look at what all the solutions are that we can get on with, and it has solutions for individuals, solutions for churches, schools and colleges, solutions for cities, towns, businesses, energy companies, governments, right through to global solutions. And it really gives the best practice. And I was just left overwhelmed, with the immensity of things we can do to solve this one. The second crisis that's coming along simultaneously is this whole issue with peak oil. Now, back in the 70s, people were saying, the oil's going to run out, the oil's going to run out, and it never did. So people said, these environmentalists, they're just all crying chicken little, and it's never going to happen. But the issue with peak oil is different. It's saying that we don't need to wait for the world's oil to run out to have a crisis. As soon as we pass the halfway mark in the world's oil supply, you've got an expanding demand that now hits a shrinking supply. So this graph basically shows, for those who can't see the image, it's like a great mountain, and we're at the peak of the mountain right now, somewhere between 2005 and 2010. The black strip that comes into play only round about now is the tar sands from Alberta and Venezuela and places like that. And some people say, look, there's 300 million barrels of tar sands. We don't need to worry, there's loads of stuff there. But to put that in context, The total world's oil supply without the tar sands is 2 trillion barrels. That's 2,000 billion. We've used 1,000 billion or 1 trillion barrels. And it's taken us 150 years to use them because we started really slowly. Right now, we're using over 30 billion barrels a year. So anyone with a calculator can say 30 billion barrels a year into 1,000 billion. Whoops, that's 33 years and it's all gone. It's because the speed we're using at is never been faster. In fact, as we put on, it's increased last year because now China and India are coming on board and wanting more oil and wanting to burn it faster. And so when we pass the peak, more people are wanting to get the oil and there's less to have. And so the rate of consumption is trying to rise and the rate of discovery and extraction is falling. And the only result of that is the price goes through the roof. And you get not oil at $60 a barrel, but $100 a barrel, $150 a barrel, $200 a barrel. And you really have a lot of people, if they've not thought about how we handle this, screaming and squealing, saying, protesting and trying to look for someone to blame. Someone must be responsible for this mess because it's certainly not my fault. Why can't I drive my car? They're trying to, paranoia gets on board if you don't think about this rationally. The truth is, this is a limited resource. We got a one-time hit. If you take, we've had 10,000 years of human civilization so far. We've got another 10,000 years ahead of us. We've got another 100,000 years ahead of us, but 10,000 is good enough. So 20,000 years of civilization. In 200 years, we use all of the oil and gas. That's the perspective. If you're a historian in the future, writing history and telling history classes from 5,000 years ahead, you will write about the 200-year period of the age of fossil fuels and the age of oil from 1850 to 2050. And you say that then it was gone. It was over. And for the last 5,000 years, you'll tell your students, we got by without any oil and without any gas and without any coal. The coal has got another 300 or 400 years supply left in it, but unless we find a way to sequestrate the CO2 emissions from coal in a way that's cost effective, we need to stop using that as well. So the age of oil may have started yesterday. Any one of you coming here tonight may have been using the halfway gallon in the world's oil supply to get here. Natural gas is on a very similar curve. Natural gas is also a limited commodity, and we in North America are past the peak for our liquid natural gas supply. Like the natural gas we can take out the ground and ship through pipes, which is why the price is rising. 5 years ago, it was $2 per million cubic meters, cubic feet. Now it's up to $5, $6, $7 and rising. In fact, in Washington State recently, a power company wanted to have bids for power. They said, you can bid on natural gas as long as you can provide a guarantee of what the price will be in 5 years. No one would give that. You couldn't buy a hedge on the price of natural gas 5 years out. And since a power plant needs a 15-year financial return before you start getting your profits, you cannot build these things anymore. You will go bankrupt before you're halfway there. So in recognition of these coming oil and gas shortages, I named this ship, and here we have the prow of a vessel which someone registered in Hong Kong with the glorious name Titan Uranus. This is not a photoshopped image. This is what we got to do, right? So the great age of fossil fuels will last from 1850 to 2050, and then they were gone. So when we're looking at the solutions to global climate change, which are how do we stop using fossil fuels, and the solutions to peak oil and gas, which is how do we live without them, they're one and the same. The technologies that we need address the same problem. We have to stop using the oil and gas before they get super expensive and our towns start collapsing and our businesses start collapsing and everyone goes into protest on the streets. Or else the only other alternative is to eat another planet. Go up to Mars and start terraforming it and try and ship all the energy back, but when you crunch the numbers, it doesn't add up. Think of the energy you used to get there. It's crazy thinking. It doesn't work. So we've got to stay on planet Earth. We've got to work out what the solutions are on planet Earth. So we have to get down and solve the problem. We're creative. We're entrepreneurial. We're inventive. There's no species like us for having get up and go kind of spirit that can tackle these problems. So let's look at the numbers first of all. In 2004, humans on planet Earth used 400 quadrillion BTUs of primary energy. In the metric system, that's 120,000 terawatt hours. That's everything from nuclear to firewood to oil, gas, coal, the works. 85% of that came from fossil fuels and 15% from nuclear, hydro, and renewables. So I'm saying, how are we going to replace all that energy? The starting place is efficiency. Everything we use today could be twice as efficient using today's technology. You can buy an energy-efficient light bulb that gives you the same light for 25 watts that a regular 100-watt incandescent does. That's 4 times more efficient. And that just stands as a metaphor for everything. Every factory, every car, every house, every bit of machinery, every fridge can be twice as efficient with stuff you can buy in Home Depot today. And with applied thought, we can make things 10 times more efficient. This is a list of all your home appliances, from clothes washers down to water beds and air conditioning. The typical one is twice as inefficient as the best practice. If you get Energy Star appliances in your stores, they'll use half the energy of the stuff. If you've got a fridge clunking away in your basement, it's burning up unnecessarily 500 kilowatt hours. No, is that right? Yeah, more than that, 600 kilowatt hours a year, which are, for those cold beers, and just demanding that more coal is burnt to keep your beer cold unnecessarily. This is one clever bit of technology. When you have a shower, it's called the GFX, gravity film exchange. When you have a shower, all that hot water is going straight down the drain. Wasted. Now picture the cold water coming in, and the cold water pipes wraps itself around a snake, really tight, around the outgoing hot water, and it recaptures the heat, and it preheats the cold water, and the energy you need for your shower is now reduced by 50%. If you have this on the second floor, on a restaurant on the second floor, when you're heating all of your hot water to the temperature needed for hygiene purposes, and it goes straight down the drain, if you apply one of these systems to that, you've got a huge source of hot energy, hot water, for all your other purposes in the restaurant. Very cheap system, no moving parts. It's called gravity film exchange because when water flows down a pipe, the water clings to the edge, which makes the heat transfer easy. So let's come to the sun. The core origin of our energy is the sun. It's mind-boggling to think about it. We take it for granted. We see that thing up there called the sun, and we think that's not nice. But it's a thermonuclear reactor. Didn't need planning permits, didn't need environmental assessments. It built itself before we got there, right? It was created 4.5 billion years ago. Its heat has traveled for 93 million miles across the deep cold of space, and it's still warm when it gets here. So that's a pretty amazing heat source. And it's sending us at least 3,000 times more energy than we use every single day. So if we have a way to capture it and use it. We are using the sun's energy all the time. Because, take it away and we notice it pretty quickly. Minus 40 is only the beginning of it. So we use it all the time, but we don't use it in an effective, organized manner. So let's address the question of heating. How do we heat ourselves if we've got no natural gas? And the first stage is if you take a house with passive solar design, so you orient your house to face the sun with the right kind of way to trap the heat, immediate 50% reduction in your heating needs for the home. So that you're allowing the sun's heat to come in the winter, and you're shading it out in the summer, and you've got a massive form of rock or gravel or concrete that traps the heat and radiates it back out. Then there's ground source heating, which some people call geothermal heating or earth energy heating. Basically, the rocks underneath us store heat. Wherever there's anything warmer than absolute zero, there's heat there. So if you drill down into the rocks, or even put a series of tubes down just 6 feet down on a horizontal basis, and fill them with glycol that freezes at a really low temperature, so it'll attract the heat out of the soil. You can heat your whole house on this system. You're laying out about $16,000 for the equipment, and you'll get paid back in about 15 years, and then you've got free energy for 100 years. It's not actually free, because you're paying for every 1 unit of energy you use to run the pump for this, you're getting 4 units back. It's totally silent, it's totally clean, totally proven system. There's lots of these systems up and running. You can also use this for water. If you live on a river or a lake, you can put a water source loop into the water and extract heat out of it. We do this in British Columbia. Even the ocean up there, you die of hypothermia in 5 minutes. But you can heat a building out of it, because it's not absolute zero. A heat loop will extract that heat and use it to heat a building. This is fascinating. In Zurich, they're now getting heat out of the sewer. Sewage has got heat in it. And they've retrofitted a sewer pipe, so the bottom of it is smooth, but it's got underneath the smoothness these heat tubes. And in Zurich, there's a 200-meter length of sewer pipe fitted with a heat pump. It's giving the heat to 940 homes, or a third of the heat for 940 homes. If you crunch the numbers on that, it's the same as 300 homes getting all of their heat out of 1.5 meters of sewer pipe, with sewage running over it all the time. It's so mind-boggling to think about that, but this heat in sewage and the right technology can get that heat and heat your home with it year-round. Right now, that energy is just going to waste. So whenever we're laying new sewer pipes, we should be going to Zurich and finding out what they're doing and doing this kind of technology, because this is technology of the future for sewer pipes. Then let's look at solar hot water. Again, this is a proven technology. It's mature in China. There are 26 million solar hot water systems up and running, and they're planning in 10 years' time 115 million. They got 3/4 of all the world's solar hot water systems, and they're paying a market price of only $180 to $360 per home. Okay, their homes are smaller, they're using smaller systems than we would. But this is a very solid, proven technology, and you could probably count the number of houses in Missoula with a solar hot water system on them on 2 hands. I don't know. How many people in this room have a solar hot water heating system? Oops. I know there's people out there who've got them, but obviously not many of us, because not a single hand went up. In Spain, a new law came into play in January of this year. Every single new home must have a solar hot water system by law. And I can picture some people who are really libertarian saying, oh, no one can tell me what to do with my home. They shouldn't do that. You can't have a law that says that. And I picture back to 1890, and someone says, we're going to have a law that says you must have indoor toilets. And someone says, oh my God, that's disgusting. They're making us have a toilet indoors. How dare they do that? And now we just take it for granted. This is just regular building code stuff. Put solar on the roof and have done with it. It looks as if the whole of France and Italy are maybe copying. And incidentally, this bylaw is a very good example of how political change happens. One Green Party councillor in Barcelona said, let's look at the idea of having a solar bylaw for the city of Barcelona. He spent 2 years working with engineers, working with the building industry to work out all the details of how it should be done. And so Barcelona brought out the bylaw. Other cities in Catalonia brought out the bylaw as well. Then Madrid brought out a municipal bylaw. And once it was in Madrid and the Spanish legislators saw it, they thought, well, why don't we do this for the whole country? You get an immediate hit. You're saving on natural gas, you're saving on electricity, and the energy is free. This is the technology for solar hot water. The best one is the evacuated tube system. In Canada, in America, it's going to cost you $3,000 to $4,000 per household to install a system. You'll get payback in 5 to 10 years, and then you've got 20 years of free hot water. So this is a really good investment by any system. This is a system for solar hot water in a hospital in Germany where they're using 690 tubes. Hospitals get through a huge amount of hot water for all the laundry and stuff they've got to do. But it shows how this can be applied on an industrial scale. Now that this goes a whole stage further, what we're looking at here is an image of a regular rancher house in Sweden where the entire south-facing roof is covered in solar hot water systems, and they're getting heating 12 months a year. Now, bear in mind, in Sweden, it's up by the Arctic Circle. In winter, they've only got 6 or 7 hours daylight, and it's cold. So how are they doing this? The next image shows a new development happening in the town of Okotoks, just outside Calgary, just probably due north of you. It's a 52-unit subdivision. It's a pretty awfully designed subdivision, I will admit. But all the garages are lined up with 723 solar hot water units on the garage roofs. And they're collected into a community heat center, which is the very top of the diagram. And here's a schematic of how it works. Basically, what's happening is that you're taking a large area of earth, you're stripping off the top 6 feet, you're drilling down small shafts, no more than an inch wide, putting pipes into them, and you're pumping that heat of the hot water into the rocks. Where by heat transfer, not the water itself, just the heat is transferred out into the rocks. You're covering the bit you excavated with 2 feet insulation, and then gravel and sand and topsoil and kids playing on it. And the heat's got nowhere else to go. In the winter, you bring it back out, even though it's minus 40, and heat your homes with it. This system gives you 12 months a year heating, which is good for 5,000 years. The incredible thing is that any home heated with natural gas or oil is going to be unsaleable in the winter. Unsaleable at all. People say, I can't live in that house. I'm going to freeze in the winter. Right now, this is the first in North America, and I know that there was a $5 million grant went into it, which means, in effect, there's $100,000 extra cost per house. But when you factor in various things to do with mass production of technology, using a different technology to the one they used, that price comes down, I believe, to about $20,000 extra per house, for a house which you can live in through the winter, as opposed to a house which you're going to freeze in the winter. And so the real estate market will very quickly adjust, I tell you. People will want this kind of house. And then, this is just for a joke, this is a solar shower. It's simply an old garden hose twisted around a log with a mixer tap thrown onto it. But the nature of the garden hose means that you get constant hot water through this. Whereas the shower bag that you buy in a store will give you one shower, then you've got to refill the bag. It just shows this has got zero cost to get you solar hot water showers in the summer. So then I want to move into a thing like asking about the way we live. I just have a glass of water here. This is looking at just some thoughts about the way we design our housing. This is an image of a typical suburban sprawl that's spreading across North America like a plague, where everyone has to drive, everyone has to burn oil, everyone has to produce CO2 in order to live in these houses. To go the other extreme, co-housing communities are basically designed to be pedestrian-oriented, clustered living together, and basically you're getting an up to 80% reduction in CO2 emissions. In co-housing, typically, you've got the cars all parked off to one side, you've got a shared pedestrian space among all the houses, you have a common house where people can eat together if they choose to, and protected green space. And because people know each other, they're very, the kids are playing in and out of the doors all the time, they're sharing rides and sharing vehicles. They don't even have individual dishwashers here because, by buying one community dishwasher on the industrial rinse cycle, you take your dishes, walk it over to the dishwasher, 1 minute rinse, carry it back home. It's quicker than you've had your own thing going. Now, every single dishwasher, you've got to mine the iron ore, make the steel, manufacture it, ship it, package it, sell it. There's a huge carbon, quotient for every single bit of machinery in our kitchens. By sharing, they've got a 30-fold reduction in the amount of metal needed for that. Let's look at normal suburbia. What I'm looking at here is, this will be difficult for NPR listeners because these are very visual images, but this is a subdivision that looks like a normal subdivision, but it's actually Village Homes in Davis, California. And the houses are all passive solar designed. The streets are much narrower than normal, and the cars can only access by the back lane. The front lanes between the houses are all green space, designed by the residents, and there are natural swales for the drainage, so there are creeks and streams running through the things. The developer saved $800 for every lot by not having put in storm drains underneath. So the houses get this clustering, and the neighbors get together to design the green space clustering, which makes it a pedestrian experience. The place is full of green space, and it's landscaped by the neighbors. The swales give character and life to the land. The residents themselves control the future development through their own homeowners association. There are 220 homes here, 20 apartments, normal size range from big 3,000 square foot house to small 600 square foot units. There's even a co-op house where 12 people are sharing a 9-bedroom house. The density is 4 times what it is across the road in normal suburbia. It's 22 people per acre on the developed land, compared to only 5 just across the road in Davis. But 15% of the area's streets and parking compared to 22% normally. They've got high density but much more green space. They've got half of the land is shared agricultural space, where they're growing grapes, they're growing crops and vegetables. They've also got a commercial space, daycare, a community center. They've got 2 playgrounds, 2 village greens, a swimming pool. The crime rate is 1/10 of what it is for Davis as a whole, so on, so on. The houses are all passive solar designed. The energy bills are half what they are in other subdivisions. Now, when these houses were first brought on the market in the early 1980s, the local realtors refused to show anyone around. They said, no one will want to live in a place where you cannot drive your car into your front garage. It's just like, oh, they had a fit. But today, they're the most sought-after residential real estate in Davis. There's a very low turnover. There's a waiting list to get into them. Everyone wants to live in this community. 80% of the people there take part in community activities. And they sell for $10 to $25 per square foot more than the same size houses in the same area across the road. What I'm saying here is that this design of housing that is better in every single way. The investors earned a 30% per year profit on their investment. The CO2 emissions are at least a quarter lower than similar suburbs nearby. It's great it's socially it's a success, economically it's a success, environmentally it's a success, and financially it's a success. And this shows that you can live in a way that's climate friendly with way less fossil fuels and live a much higher quality of life, and people are voting with their dollars to live this way. So let's move on. I want to ask the big question now, what about electricity? How are we going to live where all of the new electricity production is either being planned to come from natural gas or from coal or from nuclear? Let's go straight to solar energy. This is a house in Mission, Montana with a 12 kilowatt solar shingle system on its roof that's serving 3 homes rather. The entire roof is covered in solar shingles. And the solar revolution is about to take off. That's courtesy of a company called Solar Plexus, so that they can say thank you to me for giving them the plug. This is the Nippon Institute of Technology in Japan. This is a very modernistic looking building, which is a cross between an Arab mosque and a postmodernist cube sitting on its roof. All solar energy designed so that the light comes through the solar voltaic cells to give power and light to the building. Now, the secret with solar energy is in the cost. In 1980, solar cost $100 a watt. In 1990, it was down to $10 a watt. 2000, it was $5 a watt. Today, it is $3.50 a watt. When the price hits $2 a watt, you're going to get mass takeoff. what you got to think about, it's like the early computers. The computers, going back 30 years, they were the size of a room and cost you $1 million. Now you can go to, a big store and buy them for $500, and they fit in your pocket almost. And its mass production has driven down the price. With solar energy, the entire cost is in the equipment that's up front. The energy is free. So the price will only fall in future. Now in California, it's already cost effective to go for solar. These are the finances of a solar system in California, where you've got a big state subsidy kicking in. Your price for a 3 kilowatt system before incentives is $25,000 for a 3 kilowatt system. That's with all of the installation and everything. Your rebate and the tax credit gives you a net price of $15,000. And you get there's a formula that realtors have found that's for every $1,000 your house saves on its energy bills, you get a 20-fold increase in 20 times that much is added to the value of your house. So if your house is saving $1,000 on energy bills, it's worth $20,000 more on the market. So you're laying out $15,000 for this house, but you're going to get $23,000 back when you sell it. You're looking at a rate of return on your investment between 10 and 17%. So this is like, why would you not do this? You can effectively lay down money for solar in California. And because they have a system called net metering, which when you get too much solar energy on a sunny afternoon, you sell it back to the grid. And they have time of use metering, which means that when there's greatest demand, the energy costs more. So if the California energy maybe is 12 cents a kilowatt hour on a hot summer's afternoon, you're paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour. That is pure income. And so the income from the sale of your surplus solar and the reduction of your power bill plus your state rebate means that your loan will cover its own cost. It's cost neutral to do this. And on a commercial system, the rate of return is even better. It's 12 to 18% rate of return. Now, the figures I got this, the person I got this from, who runs a company called Green Solar in California, said that why aren't businesses all jumping at this? Who would turn down a rate of 12 to 18% return? But apparently businesses are assuming that, it's got to get a 25% rate of return, But you've got to work for that 25% rate of return. You've got to do risks, you've got to employ people, you've got to stay up at night and get sweats and stuff like that. This is free. You install the system and the money just comes in every year, guaranteed, for as long as the life of the system, which is a good 25 years. So the solar revolution is really about to take off globally, because once we hit that $2 threshold, it all goes crazy. And we've got no shortage of money to put in the subsidies needed. California is voting right now on a 1 million solar house initiative. It's been through the State Environment Committee, it's been through the State Senate, and it was passed to the vote of 28 votes to 5, I think. Schwarzenegger's in favor of it. It's got to go before the State Assembly for the final vote, and then they'll be rolling out a continuation of the whole subsidy program with a goal of 1 million solar homes by the year 2018. This is another system of gathering solar energy through solar farming, basically with a parabolic shield that reflects the sun's energy onto a tube that heats water and then turns a turbine. And this is a project in Australia. You take an area of desert. It's called Mildura, and it's called a solar tower. You cover a huge area with greenhouse and have a great tube in the middle, 1 kilometer high, or that's in American terminology, like 2/3 of a mile high. Greenhouses trap hot air. The hot air rises and turns a turbine. The key thing is that whereas solar energy on the market now is about 50 cents a kilowatt hour, this is going to come in at 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Let's say 10, because the promoters always promote and hype their numbers. But you can only do this if you've got a desert you want to write off. But it just shows the way intelligence can think about things. So now let's look at wind energy. Wind is a proven technology. It's been around for 30 years. All the snags are out of the system. Let's come back to there. The farmers can put wind turbines up in Montana and lease the footprint for the turbine to a wind turbine company for $3,500 per turbine and carry on farming underneath. So there's really good incentive for farmers to get on with this. This is the map of the wind resources in Montana. The purple is the highest resource, followed by the red and then the pink. And you've got fabulous resources. Right here in Montana, you're the 5th best in America. To put this in perspective, entire US electricity use is 3 trillion kilowatt hours a year, and your potential is 1 trillion. So you've got 1/3 of the entire US usage. And you've got 900 megawatts installed, which is about 1/500th of your capacity. So multiply 900 by 500, and you're getting like 45,000 megawatts. Each of those is going to bring in $3,500 to a farmer. And you've got a huge amount of money, potential, going into the rural community by putting wind turbines up in Montana. The highest is the purple. Purple color was highest. I can't go back very easily on this system, I don't think, can I? Yes, I can. Yeah, the purple is the highest system over in the west, and then the red. Less over to the east. And I don't know Montana enough to explain all that, but you probably know where the wind blows. Well, you think it's backwards? I have to get my glasses. Am I wrong on my numbers on this? No, the 7 is superb. The purple is superb wind, and the palest color is the marginal. There you go. That's the wind resource map from National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So with each doubling of capacity, the cost of wind is falling. And so there's about the increase in global capacity is increasing 35% every year. We've got 49,000 megawatt installed so far. The cost is 47 cents a kilowatt hour, which is cheaper than natural gas. This is, it's cheaper than all other forms of new energy. It's on a par with coal, but it's got zero emissions. When you look at offshore wind, you've got even more energy. In the southern North Sea in Europe, there's 3 times the entire electricity needs of Britain, Belgium, Holland, Germany, and Denmark put together available in the southern North Sea. Now, I talked about the moon earlier. The moon drives the tides, and the tides are a source of energy that can be predicted 1,000 years out. But tidal energy is very immature. There's only 2 systems in the world in action with this new tidal technology, and a third one going in where I live in Victoria. Basically, you've got a picture of a wind turbine on the bottom of the ocean. This one is going in off the coast of Devon in England. This system is going in off the north coast of Norway above the Arctic Circle. And you can see from the artist's rendering, it's like a string of wind turbines sitting on the ocean bottom. It's immature because we don't know how the turbines are going to react to sort of debris that's not floating but is lower down. We don't know how it reacts to barnacles. We don't know how the salt water is going to interact with the metal. But we know we've had oil rigs in the water for a long time. But the potential is there. Then there's wave power. This is a long floating thing that is being tested off Scotland, and this is being installed off the coast of Portugal right now in the Atlantic Ocean. This wave device is a more robust system, which is basically a bunch of concrete on the coast with a massive cylinder where the waves force the air into the cylinder and turn a turbine. Then as they come out, they create a vacuum and turn the turbine the other way. So this small generator, which is no more than 10 meters across, is putting 0.5 megawatt of power into the grid constantly, and it'll last as long as until the bearings run out. Then you just replace them. When we tie all this together, you've got a very different picture of the grid than for the normal. The current grid is massive big power plants, and the energy flows one way to the consumer or to the factory. The future of energy is called the distributed grid or the smart grid, and you could have 1 million sources of energy. You've got your hydro dams, you've got your large power plants still, you've got flywheels, you've got wind, you've got geothermal, you've got microhydro, you've got solar, and it's all integrated by real-time electronics according to the best pricing at the best day. So it's a very highly integrated thing, but electronics allow us to do that. But it gets some of the traditional energy engineers a bit nervous because you lose control in the old-fashioned sense. It's a very distributed, more democratic system and much more robust, because you can't knock this down. You've got so many sources of energy putting energy into the grid. So when I look at the numbers for all this, the number I used at the beginning was that the entire world energy use in 2004 was 120,000 terawatt hours. And about 3 weeks ago, Stanford brought out a brand new report on global wind energy potential. And Christina Archer, who did the study, said that the global potential is 628,000 terawatt hours. That's about 5 times more than our entire energy use on the whole planet. Add to that our solar potential. Now, solar is measured by how much land you want to cover or how many rooftops. And the formula is 120,000 terawatt hours for every 340,000 square miles. And Montana's about half that size, 145,000 square miles. Then we've got geothermal potential, 137,000 terawatt hours, tidal energy potential, biomass energy potential. And I crunched these numbers when I was doing the book, so these are all sourced on industry studies. They're not just pulled out of thin air. Gives you a total of 981,000 terawatt hours, which is 8 times more energy than we're using today. And if everything was twice as efficient, it's 16 times more. If everything was 10 times as efficient, it is 80 times more energy than we're using today. So there's not a shortage of sustainable electricity coming from the sun and the moon and nature. I'm not including nuclear in this picture. Nuclear is trying to do a revival. And I'm saying, well, why would we want to do nuclear? There's 6 reasons why we should not do nuclear. The first is the nuclear cycle from the mining of uranium to the finished product does produce CO2 emissions, because a lot of energy needed to get the uranium, process it, get it into the plant, build the plant, stuff like that. Secondly, the wastes remain, here it says they're radioactive for 100,000 years, but actually the figure is 1 million years. There was the proposal the federal government had to store nuclear waste in Nevada was recently turned down because the plan was only to store it for 10,000 years. And the environmental jurisdiction people said, no, you've got to have a place that's stable for 1 million years. It's going on being radioactive that long. So just get this in perspective. Uranium itself is a limited resource. When it's gone, it's gone. If the whole world went nuclear, it's, you've got 50 years supply and that's the end of it. Fourthly, the nuclear cycle lends itself to making atomic bombs. One of the high nuclear physicists in Pakistan recently put his kids through college by selling nuclear secrets to the Libyans and the Iranians. So it's a dodgy setup once you've got access to this technology. The North Koreans want this stuff, and do we believe their promises? Well, I'm not so sure. And then the fifth reason, nuclear plants are top terror targets. The 9/11 terrorists had discussed going for a nuclear power plant north of New York before they switched to the Twin Towers. If they'd gone for the nuclear power plant with a couple of big jets like that, you're talking evacuating New York for tens of thousands of years. Just think of the economic cost. It just begs, don't think about it. It doesn't bear thinking about. These things are not proof against a jet liner flying into them. Some of them are hardly proof against a tiny little plane going into them. And the sixth reason is the private sector will not touch nuclear energy. No one can get insurance on the cost of a possible disaster, and no one can put up a bond big enough to pay for looking after nuclear waste for 1 million years. It can only be done when governments are willing to throw taxpayers' money at it. So let's change to another topic, which is the question of how are we going to travel when there's no oil? This is, clearly a big issue. All of us are driving around using oil. We're flying using oil. Our trucks use oil. We have a 1-horsepower car. This doubtless comes from Bosnia during an oil. It's a picture of a horse towing the back half of a car. Do we have the ultimate car share cooperative? This is a picture of 2 massive Mercedes trucks in the desert, each of which is carrying at least 100 people. Or this is, how do we get goods from Shanghai to Europe? This is a picture of a bicycle with 8 enormous bales of cotton or cloth on them, on the way to Walmart. But he's got a long way to cycle if he can't use fossil fuels to get them here. So I looked at the numbers for a magazine article 2 years ago, and cars and light trucks in America use 212 billion barrels of oil every year. What are we going to do when it's gone? And you can find this in an article in Yes Magazine in the fall 2004 issue at yesmagazine.org. The issue is called Can We Live Without Oil? And this piece I did is called Getting There on Less. And I basically assume that that's 100 average trips. 5% of the trips, I say, we just stay home. You don't need to do it in the first place. You can telecommute, you can organize your shopping, so just 5%, that gives you a 5% liquid fuel reduction. You'll see why I'm saying liquid fuel as opposed to just oil soon. For 5% of the trips, we can walk. You can get 2 miles with a good walk. We're just out of the habit. This is a picture of a walking school bus in Toronto, where instead of 3 o'clock in the afternoon being rush hour because all the mums and dads are driving their kids to and from school, the kids have someone with them to walk together. When I was at school as a kid, if you lived less than 3 miles from the school, you had to walk, and that was the rule. So get back into walking, and we can tackle this incredible epidemic of juvenile obesity and diabetes that's coming on because we're all getting so televisually out of not fit. We can cycle 15% of the trips. If you've got good cycle lanes provided that are off-road, there's no risk from trucks and stuff like that, it's safe. Davis, California is getting 22% cycling. Holland's getting up to 50% cycling. Missoula here, you've got such a flat town, you could have 50% cycling easily for people commuting in around in town. It shouldn't be difficult for you. Then ride sharing for 5% of the trips. Ride sharing means that basically if you're living in a community, instead of assuming you're going to drive a ton of steel wherever you go, and when you drive a car, by the way, only 1% of the energy drives you, 99% drives the car. And so if you're going into town or want to drive to Seattle or want to do a long-distance trip or whatever, or even go to a store for a big shop-up, you go to a website and you log on and you see who else is going to do that trip and you share. You go together. It only makes sense. And then for 20% of the trips, we can use the bus or light rail transit. Boulder, Colorado has really got a grip on this, and they redesigned their whole bus system you can now get a year's transit pass in Boulder for $50. And new subdivisions, the developers are obliged to give a free transit pass for the first 3 years to people living in the subdivisions. Any neighborhood where I think 60% of the neighbors vote to do this, the whole neighborhood has the transit pass put in their municipal taxes. So you pay in advance for $50 on the taxes, and it's free for the whole neighborhood. And what's happening is they've had a threefold increase in the use of buses since they did this. Okay, it's from 1.5% to 4.5%, but it's still a threefold increase. But they've got teenagers riding the bus now, getting into the habit of riding the bus and not thinking it's just poor people's transit or just for sort of losers. And they've got smaller minibuses, and the drivers get to choose the onboard music. It gives you a style of what's happening on the buses. Hey man, we're going to hit that station soon. This is transit in Curitiba in Brazil, where the whole town's been designed, the whole city I should say, it's a major city, been designed around transit. Because the mayor of Curitiba, Jaime Lerner, looked at what happens to Rio and places dominated by the car and thought, we cannot do that. And they invented a very simple system where a bus stop is raised off the ground by 3 feet. You can go up a ramp or upstairs into it, and it's a big tube. You go inside the tube, you're protected from the rain, you buy your ticket, then you enter the bus at ground floor level. So loading is really quick. And you haven't got that hassle of waiting at the ground level, going up the steps, paying a ticket, a mother with a toddler pushchair, and like, oh my goodness, wheelchair, you've got to lower the ramp if you even have ramps for wheelchairs on transit. And Mexico City is just adopting the same system now with buses made by Volvo. Light rail in Portland. Light rail is beautifully civilized. For any city with a population of 500,000 or more, makes total sense. Taken together, those initiatives give us a 50% reduction in the amount of oil or liquid fuel that we need. So the next secret is car sharing. This is where you've got to change your whole mind around the way we think about transit, around vehicles. If you own a car, your car's got to be good for all purposes. You've got to be able to go and visit your family in New York and go shopping and do stuff around town. So you buy a vehicle that's got to have range. When you join a car share cooperative, you choose your car according to your trip. Now, I founded the car share cooperative in Victoria personally about 8 years ago. We've got 120 people who share 6 cars. In Vancouver, which is high density, they've now got 2,000 people sharing 100 vehicles. Here's the mathematics of how it all works. They pay a $20 membership fee. They pay $500 as a share to buy their share of the vehicles, which is returnable if they leave. And then if they're high usage, they're paying $40 a month and $2 per hour plus 14 cents a mile. And what this does is it makes people think before they drive, because all of your costs are on the actual journey. Once you own a car, you've paid a massive cost to buy it, a massive chunk for insurance. You go in for a small repair and it comes out being 3 times what it thought it was. But the actual trip is virtually nothing. So, to go and buy a bit of gas, to buy a litre of milk, I'll drive 5 miles, get a litre of milk, because it's very low marginal cost. So we abuse it all the time, because you've written off this big down payment, and you can't get it back. With car sharing, the payment is entirely on your usage. There's no other costs whatsoever. You don't pay for gas, you don't pay for insurance, you don't pay for repairs, you don't pay for accidents. It's all covered entirely. And what this allows is the electric vehicle revolution to take off. Because you can look at vehicles powered by electricity. Now, when I was researching all this stuff, I was blown away by how efficient electric vehicles are. This is a picture of a German sports car called the Hohlacker Sport 1, designed as a prototype in 1991. It's got a range of up to 185 miles with lithium-ion batteries. It uses between 10 and 14.5 kilowatt hours per 100 miles. Now, if you're doing 10,000 miles a year, you're paying 7 cents a kilowatt hour for your power, which is, I believe, your price in Montana. Your monthly cost to run this car is $8.50 a month. And that's a 4-seater. Maybe the back seats are a bit squashed. Maybe it's a 2 and 2 squashed seaters. A regular car is costing you $50 to $100 a month, depending how inefficient it is. Price of fuel doubles, $200 a month. This price is only going to fall because if you're using sustainable electricity, the price of all wind energy, all solar energy is going to fall because as the mass production drives down the price. Electric drive is incredibly efficient. And this is a brand new Volvo sports car that they brought out for the Chinese motor show just last year. It's more powerful, this one, with an 80 kilowatt motor, but it's got a range of 180 miles, top speed of 85 miles per, miles per hour, 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. So if you want a sports effect, you can get it electric as well. And this is a two-seater with a single child seat behind. And neighborhood electric vehicles, I mean, these are only designed for use within cities. You can, but these things have got a range of 44 miles, top speed 3.5 miles per hour. 2 cents a mile is your cost. $200 a year is all you're going to have to pay to run a neighborhood electric vehicle. And you can buy them for $7,000 to $9,000. And all you have to do is get an agreement that you don't leave the city in these things, because you're staying within the that speed limit. But I tell you that the electric vehicle revolution, if you want to get shares in companies which is going to go through, really do good stuff, invest in electric vehicles. Then the real incredible thing, you know that the Toyota Prius, I've seen them here in Missoula, the hybrid car that runs on gas electric together, where there's a switchover between the gas engine and the electric engine. And these things are twice as fuel efficient. But there's a switch on the dash that's got no purpose in North America. These folks in California at a website called calcars.org explored what was happening, and they said this switch is designed to make the car all electric. They put extra batteries in the front. There's even a space under the hood to put the batteries. And the car will now go 37 miles with no gas whatsoever. You've got an all-electric car, which when you need to go and visit Granny 100 miles away, you can put the gas in. And your miles per gallon is now up to 120 miles per gallon. So you've got the longer range with an adapted plug-in car. Put those numbers together, if half the vehicles are electric and half of those, again, are plug-in hybrids, you're looking at an 87.5% reduction in the need for liquid fuels. So for our next trick, this little thing is a solar scooter. It's a kit car made in Montreal. In fact, it's not made at all. You can buy the instructions and make it yourself for $2,000. Sorry, in Canada, $1,600. It just tells you where to buy the parts. There's no pedals on this. You just sit and the sun enables you to travel. Whenever the sun's out, midwinter, this will travel because it's using solar electricity, not heat. It'll run in sunlight in winter. This here's an electric scooter. If you want to ride a bicycle, but you're just getting elderly and your muscles don't work on the hills, you can have a little scooter thing charged up with electricity, get around town. This from Britain is an image of a hydrogen motorcycle. Came out in March. The guy's got no helmet because in Britain they don't believe in helmets. More fool they. But as a motorcycle, you have to add noise. This is totally silent. And people say, you can't have who wants to ride a motorbike that's silent? You can't show off to your friends, You've got to go rah, 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 on a silent motorbike, right? This is the Mercedes Smart Car, which is doing 56 miles per gallon. In Canada, it does 83 miles per gallon. It's quite amazing. As soon as you cross the border, you've got much more fuel efficiency because the Canadian gallon is bigger. But this is a diesel car, which means it can also run on biodiesel. This is a prototype car that Volkswagen put together that does 237 miles per gallon. Just register. It's a two-seater, designed like an Olympic bobsled for the luge, but it's lightweight. Instead of weighing, I haven't converted the numbers, they're still in kilograms there, but it's about a fifth of the weight of a normal car, using very lightweight materials. Apply that lightweight design technology to an electric vehicle, and your price is even cheaper because the car needs less electricity to drive it. You're now looking at maybe $5 a month to run an electric vehicle. So you begin to think, I have people telling me, oh my goodness, if we sign Kyoto and do all these things to change the economy's going to go bankrupt, we're going to lose jobs, everyone's going to fail. And I look at this and say, wait a minute, these cars are 10 times cheaper than gasoline cars. How can we fail? We're going to have all that extra money to spend on other things, which we're not spending on transport anymore. And if we don't do this, the amount of money we're spending on transport is going to go more and more and more up. All that money goes to the oil companies and back to the south, to the Gulf of Saudi Arabians and the Iraqis. It is not going into local businesses because it's local money. You cannot spend in the local economy. You've got to buy oil with it. When you're using sustainably produced local electricity, the power comes from your own roof and from farmers in Montana who generated it. All that money stays in the local economy. So this is an incredibly smart thing to do if you want to have a strong economy. Taking those things all together, we get a 97% reduction in the amount of oil needed with the really efficient cars factored in. And that 3% can be substituted with biofuels, fuels derived from agricultural waste, from forest waste, and stuff like that. This is a car called the Compo car in Zurich, Switzerland, where they collect their household compostables. in a green bin. We have a blue bin in Canada for our recyclables. They have a green bin for compostables as well. They put it in a big in-vessel container, catch the methane. They're running 1,200 cars on compost gas in Zurich right now. They're driving around the streets of Zurich on compost gas right now. We just let if you put compost waste in the garbage, it goes to the landfill, it produces methane, which is 23 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Totally stupid thing to do. Put it in your car. Then there's biodiesel, and everyone's talking about this. You can get biodiesel from the waste fat outside any restaurant in town. Right now, restaurants are paying to have their biodiesel waste taken away, and it's turned into animal feed and shipped out to China and stuff like that. You can run a car on this stuff. You can run it on fish waste, on animal wastes, on rotting crops. And one thing I don't believe we should do is grow crops specifically for the purpose of biofuels. I think we're going to need the cropland for growing food for ourselves and for the planet. So what about hydrogen? This is everything the Bush administration is talking about hydrogen, and people talk about the solar hydrogen economy. But hydrogen is not a source of energy. It's a carrier of energy. I mean, there's hydrogen in my glass of water, but if you want to get it, you've got to split the water. There's hydrogen in natural gas. Formula for natural gas is CH4. The H is the hydrogen, the C is the carbon. So when you take out the hydrogen, you're releasing carbon dioxide. You're still producing greenhouse gases. And then, because the North America's natural gas supplies is beginning to run dry, we're going to have to ship natural gas in liquefied form from Russia and from Iran in these massive big tankers, which are, I should say, extremely explosive. There's a liquefied gas terminal in Boston, and when the tankers come in, they have sharpshooters on the bridge and helicopters above to make damn sure that terrorists don't get near it and blow up half of Boston, because these things are scary. And then if the whole world went to hydrogen from natural gas, the global natural gas supply is going to run out by 2050, 2060 anyway. So you're just getting your complex hydrogen infrastructure in place with new service stations and new pipelines, then there's no gas left to make the hydrogen. So then you say, okay, we'll get hydrogen from the other source, green hydrogen, where you're using clean, sustainable electricity from solar or wind. You're doing reverse electrolysis to split water, taking the H out of the O in H2O, manufacturing the hydrogen, putting it in a fuel cell to make electricity. Well, you've just used electricity to make electricity and lost half of the power in the process. Why would you want to do that if you can put the electricity straight in an electric car? It's only when you realize how powerful electric vehicles are that this thing begins to make sense. If you assume your car has to have liquid fuel, then you'll think hydrogen is the way to go. So the existing car makers who don't want to change because they don't have electric vehicle patents and technologies, and they're trying to scrap them if they do, are not thinking with their hats on properly. So there's still so many questions that I haven't, had a chance to address. I mean, how are we going to live as a whole? For the whole of the next 5,000 years, 10,000 years, cold fusion and things like that, there's no sign of it coming on board. It's an experiment that hasn't happened. People talk about zero-point energy. Now, zero-point energy might be the energy of pure consciousness or the energy of empty space, but no one has shown how you can plug a kettle into it. There's no real power coming out of it we can do anything useful with. So how are airplanes going to fly? This is an image of a horse with wings. I mean, do we need more horsepower? This is an image of the A310 Airbus from Europe fitted for hydrogen, where the entire top half of the plane has been expanded massively to carry the hydrogen fuel. But when I tell you there are 24,000 flights happening every single day of the year, where's the hydrogen going to come from to put in these 24,000 flights? It ain't going to happen. We are not going to be flying around the world. There's just no way we can get fuel for this kind of stuff. This is an image of a solar aeroplane, which is going to fly around the world. In about 5 years' time, it's being designed now, I believe, in France. It's called the Solar Impulse, and it carries one person. And you've got to do it at 35,000 feet as well. So you've got to have a really good thermal underwear. So this is not exactly the way for going traveling either. So flying is going to be something we're going to look back on. And we're going to say welcome to the age of the real-time electronic public interspace. When you can imagine, you can go to a public place and you can stand there in real time in front of a plasma screen or whatever and see your granny on the other side or your long-distance lover and touch hands electronically and speak in real time and see each other in real time but not actually touch. And that's going to have to pass for, those of us who have, I have parents back in England. I've done long distance love affairs from England to Canada. You're on the phone the whole time, and we all burn up fossil fuels doing it. It's not going to happen anymore. So what about trucks? All of our goods, all the roads in North America are packed full of these massive trucks. This is a Japanese hybrid truck, and FedEx have a hybrid truck as well. So as soon as you got a hybrid drive, you've got a 50% reduced need for fuel, but it's still fuel. The real key is that we're going to have to stop importing so many goods and make more things locally. And because local goods, you haven't got to carry them everywhere. So we're going to be needing to build our local economies and look at the stuff we're importing, because we're not going to be able to afford to import it. What about travel by sea? Here we have an image of a solar sports boat on a lake in Switzerland. That's Lake Geneva with one person. A solar cruising ship, which probably holds about 30, 40 people, and a solar catamaran, which is it's got wind turbines and solar on it. It seems to have room for about 2 people on it. So that's not going to get us very far, but look at this. This is an image called the Ocel for a sustainably powered ship that can carry 10,000 cars, or 10,000 electric vehicles. Now, this has been designed for an ocean-going cargo ship by Wallenius Wilhelmsen. These are a big Nordic shipping line. These folks are serious. This is powered by wind, by solar, and by wave energy. And when there's more wind and wave and solar than is needed, they generate hydrogen to carry on powering when those things aren't running. And in these little images at the bottom, that's the top left-hand one is the Orcelle. Below that is the Queen Elizabeth cruise liner, to show you the size of this monster. Now, this is a serious shipping line, but they're thinking this way already. They know that they've got to think beyond fossil fuels if they want to carry on operating at all. Whether this will run, I don't know. There's a lot of willingness to believe that you can do this sort of thing, but we don't know. Can we grow enough food? All of our synthetically, chemically derived food is premised on oil and gas. All fertilizers need natural gas to make them. All pesticides are made from oil. So the question is, can we grow the world's food organically? Cuba's doing it already. Cuba had to go organic because Russia cut their budget and cut off their pocket money, and they had no money to import anything, so they had to shift to organic. Now, the statistics on organic food are that with really skillful organic farming, you can get the same yields. When you convert from a regular chemical farm to organic, your soil is like a drug addict who's been on the streets for 5 years, is so wimpy and thin it's going to die, so you're going to get very reduced yields. You need at least 3 years to build up your soil again. Now in Europe, Denmark and Sweden and Holland put a tax on fertilizers and pesticides and use the revenue as a subsidy for the transition for farmers. So with all of these things, policy is really critical, and I haven't spoken about that much yet. I'll come to that at the end, because there are 3 things you need. You need the technology, and I'm saying we've got the technology. You need the policy to drive it, and then you need citizen activism to build the political will. There are so many questions and so many solutions. This is an image here. I'm basically saying we're so creative, we can do this thing. This is a design for a plant that would make biodiesel by farming algae. Wherever there's sun and sort of rotting material, you get algae. And you can use the algae to make biodiesel and put it in vehicles, put it in farm equipment, whatever you want. The key thing is we lack political will. This is the nub of the problem. We have not generated the political will to say, we can do this, and we're not organized well enough. I tackled this in British Columbia just a year and a half ago by saying, okay, we need to set up a Sustainable Energy Association for British Columbia. And BC is very backwards at the moment. We have no wind turbines spinning whatsoever. We pay in US dollars 4 cents a kilowatt hour for our electricity, so we're really spoiled. And we want BC to become a world leader in the generation and use of sustainable energy. And in 1 year, we got coming up to 500 members and 7 chapters around the province, where people are organizing locally, doing stuff locally, putting on exhibits, writing to ministers, holding public meetings. And really, sorry, this is an image from a previous talk I gave, that one. Haven't changed it. And there's an excitement. Most of the members are in their 20s and 30s. They're thinking, I can get a career out of this. And they are already, through the networking they're doing. If you look around the world, every single thing has got to be transformed for the new energy technology. There's a lot of careers to be had from this. All engineering departments should be onto this. If they're not, the professors should be fired. What's possible? In April of this year, the CEO of Duke Energy, a big oil and gas company, Paul Anderson, he called for a carbon tax. He said, personally, I feel the time has come to act, to take steps as a nation to reduce the carbon intensity of our economy. His colleagues in the oil and gas industry said, "You're crazy. You're suggesting a policy measure that will reduce their consumption of the very thing we're producing." But he's looked at the big picture. The chair of Shell Oil in Britain has also caused for national, global legislation to reduce our use of oil. He says we as an oil company can't do it on our own. We have to work in competition with the other companies. Our share value is critical. If we don't get the share value, we don't get the investment, we can't compete. They're putting a very, very small amount into solar and hydrogen and wind, but it's very, very small compared to their oil. They said we've got to have a global treaty on this stuff. The chair of BP, and BP, which used to stand for Beyond Petroleum, used to stand for British Petroleum, now stands for Beyond Petroleum. The chair of BP, Lord Oxborough, no, I'm sorry, it's the chair of Shell who said this, I'm getting it wrong. The chair of Shell is so alarmed by climate change that his family no longer flies on holidays. They have only one car. They bought one fuel-efficient hybrid car and sold the other car. They cycle and walk wherever they're going, and they retrofitted the whole house for super energy efficiency. He only flies on business. He is so concerned about what's happening with global climate change. What's possible number 2? On June the 1st, what's that? 3 weeks ago, California made the commitment to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to the 2000 levels by 2010, to the 1990 level by 2020, and 80% reduction below the 1990 level by 2050. That is what we need, an 80% reduction in our use of fossil fuels, and that is what California is now committed itself to do with 30 million people. And Schwarzenegger himself said, I can't get his accent, so I shan't try, I'd just be stupid, right? I could try, but it'd be fun, I shan't. I say the global warming debate is over. We know the science, we see the threat, and we know the time for action is now. And finally, what's possible on June the 20th, well, actually, the mayors' conference happened a bit earlier, but yesterday, 2 days ago, 167 mayors across North America have signed on to the Mayors' Climate Protection Agreement, committing their cities to achieve the global Kyoto target, including Mike Cadiz, your mayor here in Missoula, which you should be proud of, right? And notice on the map, it's all East Coast and West Coast. The central, part of America is not well represented, so what you're doing is really important here. And they're saying, we need to join the world in signing on to the Kyoto Protocol. And this was launched by Mike Nichol, the mayor of Seattle. And in Washington State, they're so embarrassed by what Washington, D.C. is doing that they're saying, we need to go on our own route and we need to join the world in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. The mayor of La Crosse, Wisconsin said, this is a matter of life and death for future generations and to this planet. The mayor of Mount Vernon, New York, said, the consequences of us not acting affirmatively are enormous. And the mayor of Hallandale Beach in Florida said, this is not only an environmental protection issue, it's an economic development and a sustainability issue. Protecting our environment, we're protecting our resources and preserving them for future generations to use. So it's all about building the political will. Here in Missoula, you've got the Missoula Sustainable Business Council, the Missoula Urban Demonstration Project, the Montana Environmental Information Center, the Montana Renewable Energy Association, the Northwest Energy Coalition, the Renewable Northwest Project. So you've got people working on this. Join those groups, get actively involved, help them to do this stuff, because we've got to build the political will. Now I'm getting on to, I'm a little got a closing segment here where I get into some big picture stuff. The problem is that for every good solution, there's a good saboteur. ExxonMobil has spent $13 million working to undermine the science of global climate change. They've funded 40 different groups which play hard and loose with the science. They do what I call tobacco science. They will put out studies, say it's not proven, it's not true, and the media loves it. The media likes to have a conflict, so the general American public believes it's not true. It's not proven. It is proven, it is solid. It's only because ExxonMobil money is out there. There was a White House staffer called Philip Cooney who was found out last week that he was editing the scientific climate change report to say, well, maybe and not really, and taking out all the serious stuff. When it was brought out, I believe, in the New York Times, he resigned, and 4 days later, he was hired by Exxon, who thought, he's our man. Go to the heatisonline.org and you'll get all the details of this stuff. It's a very, very serious problem. During the global Kyoto negotiations, which were all the nations of the world met and decided by consensus what kind of treaty the world would do, there were two nations that constantly said, we can't do that and can't do this and can't do the other. They were Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, believe it or not. Believe it or not, Saudi Arabia has actually asked for global damages for the loss of the impact of their economy of reducing our use of oil. Give us a break, folks. The Saudi and Kuwaiti delegates were advised by a man called Don Perlman, who's a New York lawyer who worked for the Global Climate Coalition, paid for by Exxon, to hand bits of paper to the Saudi and Kuwaiti delegates saying, object now, complain now, object now, complain now, and they just read them out. He controlled the proceedings. Exxon controlled the proceedings in the global negotiations. It should never have been allowed to happen. But that's how much running sabotage is happening on all this. If we don't understand the opposition, we can't run the politics properly. The solutions exist. It's the political will that's needed. This is a quote from a professor of geology at University of Colorado. Our children and grandchildren are going to be mad at us for burning all this oil. It took Earth 500 million years to create the stuff we're burning in 200 years. Renewable energy sources are where we need to be headed. So this is our choice. Do we wait for civilization to fall apart? And for those who can't see it, I got an image of this is pavement art, where civilization is falling down the black hole of ecological collapse. Or do we get to work and build the world we want? That's the choice. Now, this is the key thing to understand. If we're not guided by a conscious vision of the future that we want to see, by default, we're guided by our unconscious acceptance of the present we already have. I'm coming to some really critical stuff now that's very real time in the middle of our brains, what goes on in the way we choose. In quantum physics, there are particles whose origin lies in the past and particles whose origin lies in the future. Time is not what we think it is. Time goes faster and slower according to the speed of light and all sorts of stuff like that. Every habit is premised on a past action. We don't think about it, we do what worked in the past. But every choice is premised on a future action. You cannot do anything without having a future intention in mind. And this is really important because it's the shape of our intentions that determine the future of our lives. And globally, it's the shape of our intentions for the world that determine the future of our world. The way we think is the critical factor in this. Our consciousness evolved from stardust. It's part of nature. We're not separate. We're not an alien species. The very fact that we have consciousness came out of this process of evolution over 15 billion years. We live in a conscious universe. It's the particles themselves that have this consciousness. It's part of nature. We are the universe pondering part of its own future. I don't say all of its own future because I'm sure there are doubtless other planets and galaxies out there where people are going through the same kind of crisis, or else they went through it 1 million years ago. They're looking at us from their UFOs and thinking, when are these folks going to get their act together? The question is, how are we going to choose? We've come a long way since evolution began. Where are we going? It's such a big picture question, but we've got to ask it. Wherever we're going somewhere very fast. You think about, we left Africa 100,000 years ago. We developed agriculture 10,000 years ago. We developed the printing press 500 years ago. We developed electromagnetism 100 years ago. The internet 10 years ago. Everything is getting faster. We're going somewhere, but as a planet, we have no consensus about the direction where we're going. In fact, it's so bad that a group of people on the Christian right have decided that where we're going is the rapture. The second coming of Jesus will come down and take us all up to heaven, and the sooner we have global disaster to bring on Armageddon, the better we can go to Jesus and meet our Maker. Now, for the most rational, scientific nation on the planet to be thinking that way is a sort of cosmic disaster, that we surrender so much of our intelligence to think that kind of way, and those people are in the White House. This is what's scary. We've got to re-empower ourselves with this incredible vision of where is evolution taking us? What are we doing on this planet? Where are we going? It's ours to choose. If we allow global climate change to run its course, we are in effect giving up on the gift of choice that nature has given us. And nature is waiting our decision, with 1/4 of all species facing extinction based on our decision. There are so many solutions. All we have to do is decide and then get involved. Do whatever it takes, whether we retrofit our own homes, start walking and cycling more, join a non-profit group, write to your legislators, get involved, because the planet's on the line for this thing. And for those who can't, this is an image I found of the sun shining on an ocean, where the sun shines in the image of a heart on the ocean to express something that's beyond words. The welfare of the planet is the highest law for us at the moment. We've got to think beyond our city, beyond our nation, beyond our cultures. We've got to think for the welfare of the planet as a whole. When we solve this problem, will probably be allowed to join the Intergalactic Federation. They say, okay, you folks have passed the test, now we'll land our UFOs and speak to you and show you how we do these clever things, because you're now join the race of civilized beings in space. We're still primitives until we pass this test. We're still threatening to throw nuclear weapons at each other to see if they work. We're still behaving like angry teenagers with a temper tantrum. We got to get it together and become mature as a planet. And the incredible thing is we only saw our own planet for the first time in 1966 and said, oh, that's what we look like. Up to that moment, we fell in love with our nations. And we identified with our nation as being the most important thing. When you do that, every other nation is not as good. Or they're enemies, or they're just strangers, and you don't want them. You don't want colored people, you don't want other nation people. When you identify with the planet, we are all the same beings. And the neat thing about this is when you think about the universe as a whole, the universe is made of the same elements. There's hydrogen everywhere. Any other being on any other planet is going to be made in the same basic shape as we are. They may have 3 eyes and 4 noses and different places for their arms and limbs, but they're going to go through a similar crisis. They're going to go through a carbon crisis. They're going to go through a crisis of intelligence, as consciousness becomes aware and starts thinking about itself and then thinks about what it's doing. And if you accept that we are spiritual beings, then you've got to ask, what is the place of spirit in the universe? How does spirit relate to evolution? Evolution as being a 15 billion year process that goes back to the Big Bang. And you can only logically conclude that every other being on every other planet would share the same spiritual universe. Because how can it possibly be otherwise? It cannot be otherwise. There can only be one universe. If there are 2 universes that are in a relationship to each other, therefore in the bigger picture they're part of the same universe. There can only be one universe, it can only work by one set of laws. If there are multiple universes, they're in a relationship. We're back to one universe. And the key thing is it's our generation, while we are on watch on planet Earth, who are facing this most critical set of choices. Whether we let it go down the tubes, and maybe take 1,000 years to recover through all the sea level rise and the chaos, and don't even think about this, all the toxins that will be put into the oceans as the sea level rises, because we're the most chemically noxious species at the moment. Or we get a grip on this thing, and we realize that the vision of living sustainably, sustainable homes, sustainable neighborhoods, sustainable villages and cities, is a very joyful thing, with much more contact with neighbors, more talking, more fitness, more health, more liveliness. When we're back to the neighborhood coffee house and the pub, instead of sitting around television in the evening, because it's neighborhood we're losing with driving everywhere. So there's an incredible number of plus good signs for making this transition. And basically, this is our choice. So I'll leave you with my personal website, which is earthfuture.com, where a lot of this stuff is up there. And basically say, this image here of it's a metaphor for something, it's a 100-year-old turtle sitting next to a 6-month-old hippo. In the tsunami that happened in December, the hippo got washed out to sea and lost its mother. When it was washed ashore, it was adopted by the turtle. This is for real. This is not a photoshopped image. This is for real. And it says something. I'm not sure what it says, but it says something. So there we go. We got a good half hour for questions and discussions, so I'll leave that to fade out. If I touch the screen, there we are. I can bring up the lights, and we can go to questions and discussions. So thank you very much for listening. You've been a great audience. So, disagreements, thoughts, questions. And for NPR, I'll repeat the questions so that our other listeners, I don't know how many thousands of other listeners we got, but who knows, right? We're in august company here at the very back, yes. And tell you what, say your name as well so that people, this is a small town. I used to watch Star Trek, but not anymore.
Well, I just wanted to know if you knew where the Vulcans first landed on Earth.
The question is, do I know where the Vulcans first landed on Earth? No, I don't. Where did they land? Where?
Central Montana, because that's where warp speed was first invented. And that's the Vulcans noticed us, and then they came back.
She's saying the Vulcans first landed in central Montana because that's where warp speed works the best. Absolutely. Bring the imagination in. Thank you for that. Yes. Other thought? Yes, up here. Can you stand up so they can hear you?
Okay, Buddy Brown. When you had the list of all the organizations in Missoula,
Yes.
what you need to add to that is the National Global Warming Coalition.
Okay, the National Global Warming Coalition, and the website for that is
www.globalwarmingsolution.org.
www.globalwarmingsolution.org. Yeah, thanks for that. Yes. Yeah, I'm a foreigner, so I did my best to get what was happening here, but I missed that one. Other questions? Or once you get the juices going, because there's a lot of controversial stuff in here around hydrogen and electricity and stuff at the back. Yes.
My name is Minna, and I was just wondering, a lot of the things that you were proposing, which I was very interested in and for the most part, involve new production,
Yes.
such as like with cars and with solar and with wind and
Yes.
everything. You have to create the infrastructure to an extent. And a lot of those things aren't necessarily renewable. A lot of the materials that you're using to create the infrastructure, like with cars or something, you're not necessarily just using renewable resources, the metals and everything like that. So I'm just wondering how you envision a way for creating that in a sustainable way.
Yeah, the question is asking that many of the technologies I mentioned involve new production because they're new technologies, and so is the production sustainable, and how do we do that? Well, solar is coming from sand, so there's no shortage of sand. It's silicon, so there's no basic shortage with solar. And the interesting question is the net energy needed. Right now, for a solar panel, which is solar cells framed by aluminum on the edge to put on your house, you need to generate energy for 3 years to cover the cost of doing that. When you go to solar shingles, where there's no aluminum around the edge, it falls to 3 months. So because most of the energy is in the aluminum, which is very expensive, right? With the modern cars, we're looking not to use steel, but carbon fiber. And I don't actually know how carbon fiber is made, so I've got to pass on that one. A friend in Vancouver who's into electric cars was saying that what he wanted to do was take old beat-up Honda Civics that are 15 years old and worth $500 and convert them to electric vehicles, because they're perfectly good. It's the engine that's all worn out. So then you've got a local business converting existing cars instead of them going to recycling. For wind turbines, the industry's up and mature already. You're talking, I think glass fiber type structures for the wind and concrete for the main towers. And concrete is gravel and cement. Now, cement itself is a problem because the process of making cement does release emissions because of the calcium carbonate thing. But no one else is putting together presentations like this to put the solutions forward. So to go the next step needs someone to put a good research bit of work into it to say just how do we find the energy to do this transition? Because it's a very important question. Yeah, thanks. Yes.
It seemed to me that the second part of your talk in some ways undermined the first part of your talk. In the first part of your talk, you gave encouraging economic projections of the cost of solar, the cost of wind, and so forth.
Yes.
And yet in the second part, you almost implied you didn't believe your own numbers because it became a political question. Won't things take care of themselves if the numbers are as good as you say?
The question is it's a very good point. I was saying that taken alone, looked at commercially, it looks as if the numbers are really good because the cost is going to come down. And then I'm saying that the real thing we lack is political will. They're both true. The thing is the numbers are not coming down fast enough. If you had no incentive systems, there'd be no solar happening anywhere in the world. The Germans and the Japanese are driving it, and now the Californians all are using government money to encourage production. Exactly the same, I should say, as the government did for the oil industry and for the coal industry when those got rolling. It makes sense at the beginning of a technology to put in government support. So it's the policy that is needed to drive it. If you want to get transit systems up, you've got to have policy. Because for public transit, for redesigning our cities, for walking and cycling, that is a design decision made by your planning department. It's purely political. It's neither cost nor not cost. Once we get to that threshold of price, it will look after itself. So the subsidy programs done in Japan and Germany are for a falling subsidy, California as well. So the subsidy that's put in falls and falls and falls as the production rises. It's designed specifically to leverage production. So that's how I reconcile the two of them. Yeah. Yes, over here.
Well, the auto manufacturers in this country, in the U.S., gave up on the electric vehicle about 8 to 10 years ago. why exactly? They figured the overall cost when you consider the batteries had to be exchanged and everything, but they figured that it wasn't cost effective and they just gave up on it. I see over apparently in Europe, they haven't.
Well, no, there are very few electric vehicles in Europe. The question was like the US auto industry seemingly gave up on electric vehicles about 8 years ago. And to back that up, there was an incident earlier this year when I think Ford recalled their EV1 cars. And 2 Californians were so outraged they had a car sit-in and they protested and fasted. And the media loved it so much because they were going to scrap their electric cars that Ford had to recant and not scrap them. My belief is that what happened is very simple. It's a golf course politics. That the executives of Ford were on the golf course with the executives of Exxon, and the Exxon people said, what's with these electric vehicles? I mean, my daughter's marrying your son next month and you're not using oil? They couldn't get their mind around it, not using oil. They're so wedded to that. And there was running opposition from the oil industry against electric vehicles. Because electric vehicles are totally efficient. And then they always justify that battery technology is not developing fast enough. Because no one in a corporation is going to design car sharing as a solution. I'm saying vehicle sharing is a solution that enables electric vehicles to take off. And I know that it's extremely successful when you get it established. But I think it's political, the decision to scrap of electric vehicles, because they do work, and people who have them love them. Not to mention how incredibly cheap they are. So you've got to go to the politics to understand that. That's my take on it anyway. Other thoughts, questions here? Yes?
Globalization is so thoroughly embraced right now, and it's completely reliant on very intense transportation of materials from one country to another.
Yes.
A multi-step process to create one computer. That trend is not encouraging, for
No.
what you were talking
Yeah. The question is saying that globalization is such an embedded process and there's so much energy needed to ship stuff all around the world. And what I'm saying is it puts a really big problem in the core of globalization. But the real change that's happening, there's 2 sides to globalization, or 3 sides really. There's globalization of technologies and made by corporations. Then there's globalization of the mind, which is all our software we're sharing, and ways to share intelligence. And that we can zip electrons to and fro without using any energy whatsoever. And there's a third globalization of the heart, which is the absolutely essential globalization, because that's the only way we're going to stop having wars, stop having poverty, and really care for each other, across the world. So I think we're going to have to really pull back on exporting technologies, around the world. I mean, what's happening? I believe in globalization for things like solar and wind. You'd never get global takeoff. We're never going to make your own wind turbines, your own solar things here in Missoula. You've got to ship them in from somewhere because you need the large factories. But it's done under license. I mean, the Danish wind companies don't ship their turbine blades and the turbines from Denmark. They set up a licensed company somewhere. They're looking for a place right now. They put it on a rail line because the blades of these things are 50 meters long. You can't put them on a truck. You've got to put them on a rail line to ship them. And then they do it locally. They've got plants licensed in India, plants licensed, coming up in China. So you localize your production. What you exchange globally is the ideas. And that makes a total different picture. Yeah. Yes. Anyone else? Yes.
Are the oil companies and power companies, have they bought up photovoltaic manufacturers?
No. There was a period in the 1970s when some of the people doing solar hot water complained that the oil companies are buying up the patents and closing them down. Today, it's totally out of the bag. The leading solar energy company is Sharp in Japan, followed, I believe, by Kyocera. BP itself, with its own solar subsidiary, is in at number 3. And it's out of the bag. No, and wind energy, they're not even in the game at all. So you don't need to worry about technology being bought up. It's free and running. It was true, but not anymore. Anyone else? Yes.
Ernie Morris, Phoenix, Arizona. You didn't really mention rail. I've never been able to figure out why rail is not competitive, not only for passengers, but for freight. It has to be cheaper to run a train across country than it does 1,500 trucks.
Yeah, he's saying I didn't really mention rail, and it has to be cheaper to run a railway system than 1,500 trucks. And you're right. It was I'll go home and adjust it and include railways, because railways I come from Europe. Railways are fabulous. I just love railways. You sit and you talk to neighbors and you have a very pleasant, stress-free ride. And we even love the sound of railways going through because it's one sound, then it's gone, whereas the sound of the highway is constant, never-ending. So you're totally right. Railways are a big part of all this. And the new efficient trains are really something to behold. Yeah. Yes.
I was noticing, obviously, how you addressed hydrogen and how negative you were about it.
Yes.
But I also noticed that that ship that you showed us
Yes.
converts water
Yes.
into hydrogen and then stores it in a fuel cell.
Yes.
And it seems to me that the time when hydrogen makes the most sense is when you have excess energy.
Yes.
That you can't get onto the grid.
Yes. Yeah, she's saying,
You then store that energy.
that's right. Yeah, I mean, because I primarily geared my stuff around cars and trucks for, the question is around hydrogen. Like, why was I seemingly very hard on hydrogen, and yet the ship, the big ocean-going liner to carry cars is using hydrogen. And hydrogen's good purpose is, once you've made it, you can store it. So I'm simultaneously saying, look, we've got way more sustainable energy than we need. I mean, Saudi Arabia could cover itself with solar panels, produce more electricity they wanted, so they could make hydrogen from that. And what you've got to think when you're using hydrogen is you're basically using it to make electricity. BMW are planning to burn it directly in the tank, but you've got to have a big tank and it's explosive. So it's most sensible is to put it in a fuel cell to make electricity. You are losing half of the electricity you put in. So your advantage has got to outweigh that. So for long-distance trucking, long-distance shipping, anywhere you need to store the stuff, then it makes sense. I think that's probably a specialist application. What I can't see is retrofitting the entire North American fuel infrastructure system for a whole new hydrogen system. For trucks, it's easy because trucks can go to a particular location and refuel. You can do them every 300 kilometers apart and the trucks can still refuel. For regular cars, you can't do that. You need them. I mean, how many gas stations are there here in Missoula? I mean, 10, 15 probably, for all I know. And people want that local stuff. So you're right that there's definitely a role for hydrogen in there, but we should not, and this is what I'm trying to disabuse us of, we should not think that hydrogen is the answer. It's got a small part to play. And even the car manufacturers are talking hydrogen, saying, we're not going to get a hydrogen vehicle out till 2020. We're going to be in crisis mode way before 2020 on this one. Electric we can do tomorrow morning. You plug an electric car in wherever you are. It's a proven technology here and now. That's the great thing about it. You can retrofit an existing car to electric. So it's a very simple, easy technology. Yeah.
Just to follow up on it, though, I think that when you talk about wind, for instance, in eastern Montana, which is where the wind is,
Yes.
the problem is, as I understand it, that wind is intermittent.
Yes.
Right? And so, in order to get it where it is,
Yes.
you need to have transmission lines.
Yes.
Well, that's a huge environmental impact in and of itself.
Yeah. The question is like, say wind, for instance. To get wind anywhere useful, you've got to have transmission lines to get it there. So when a company is planning a wind turbine at the moment, part of the cost is how close to the grid can we be? I mean, you can put wind on the top of the mountains, but you never get transmission up there. So there's two questions in here. One is the laying of transmission lines, where you either lay the big things above ground or put them underground. And the future has to be underground, where you've got the soil or whatever. You're not going to put them underground through the Rockies probably, but so we've got to think about that. The other issue is around firm power, because the wind only blows on average 8 hours a day, and the sun only shines certain hours a day. But the interesting thing is, the more wind turbines you have, the greater the firm power factor. So the firm power factor for wind is normally seen as 30%, 8 hours a day, 33%. Offshore, it's 40%. You want to get 100%. But when you have lots of different turbines, whether they're clustered in certain areas or whatever, the chances that some of them spinning rise just by the sheer nature of mathematics. And then when you integrate that with your geothermal power and your solar power and maybe energy storage systems, any place that's got a hydro dam can use the hydro dam as a storage system. Because basically, when you've got surplus energy coming in from wind or whatever, you hold the water in the hydro dam and it just accumulates and accumulates, and you can release it when the wind turbines are not blowing. So right now, Denmark is getting like 20% of its energy from the wind. They're planning to get 50%. And when they've got too much energy, they ship it across to Norway under the ocean, and it's stored behind Norway's dams, and then Norway sends it back to them when they need it more. So but a lot of America hasn't got dams, so we've got to think of other ways. So there's a lot of stuff to crunch around turning this grid into a firm power grid that's reliable. And there may be that what we have is if you do what's called real-time metering, difficult power costs more than easy power. And so your meter will charge you more when there's a shortage of power, which means that the incentive to not use appliances. It's already practiced in quite a few places. So, you learn to use your dishwasher, on an automatic timer at 2 in the morning, whatever it is. Things you change your power usage according to the availability of power. It may also be, and this is being discussed in Britain, we have carbon rationing and electricity rationing. The idea is being floated in Britain to deal with the carbon crisis that every citizen is given a carbon ration. And when you go to buy gas, you hand in your carbon ration card, and if you've got your allowances, you can get it as normal. If you want to go beyond your allowance, you've got to pay 5 times more, and other people are then selling their carbon rations to you. Someone who doesn't run a car at all say, I can do really well by not running a car, because I can sell my carbon ration to someone who wants to be an energy hog. But it's basically saying there is a limit to how much carbon we use, and then you've got to ratchet that down every year, so we use less and less carbon. That pushes the prices up, and that drives the market for the alternatives. The policy I want to mention that's the single best policy for bringing solar energy and wind energy into the grid is called the Advanced Renewables Tariff. It's not being done in North America, but the way it works, and there are 17 European nations using it, and the whole of China. The way it works is that every energy producer, solar, wind, or whatever, is guaranteed access to the grid, number one thing. You haven't got to negotiate it or whatever. Secondly, you're guaranteed a price for your power designed to meet the needs of the investor and to get the basic level of profit needed to get the investment flowing. So for wind, it might be, we'll guarantee you 6 cents a kilowatt hour. For solar energy in Washington State right now, they're guaranteeing 50 cents a kilowatt hour. In Germany, they're paying you $1 a kilowatt hour for solar energy put into the grid. Third is you're guaranteed that price for 20 years. So the investor has time to pay off the cost of the equipment and then get the profit needed, or else you wouldn't put the investment in the first place. And fourthly, the cost is spread among everyone getting power from the utility. It's not on the taxes. If it's on the taxes, the government can change and they cut it. And that's terrible for investors. You just haven't got the stability. When it's on the rates, it's guaranteed and there forever. When the European nations changed to this policy, they had a 3-fold increase in take-up for wind and solar. And in Denmark, where they pioneered it, what happened was that energy cooperatives were formed by farmers and dentists and doctors and lawyers, anyone with spare money. They would invest in money in the local energy cooperatives. And the rule was put in place in Denmark that if you invest in a wind turbine so that you own it as a wind turbine cooperative, you must build it within 10 kilometers of where you live. And they have a saying in Germany that your own pig manure doesn't smell that bad. You can look at these turbines and say, that's my pension spinning. And your desire to get all upset and go complaining is suddenly changed by using that owner cooperative system. It's not nasty corporations coming in to put a nasty, ugly thing up at your expense and they get the profits. Missoula itself, municipality, could have a municipal energy cooperative. The farmers could have farmers' energy cooperatives. The doctors and dentists could have them. The teachers could have them. And you yourselves invest in the future of our energy supply. It's absolutely the way to go if you have this kind of policy. But you've got to get that policy to make it work. Yes, at the back.
Robin Garrett. I'm very pro wind power and solar power, but I am concerned about what I read are the effects of a lot of wind turbines on bird life, killing raptors and migratory birds. And I see those underwater tidal turbines look like they have the potential to do a lot of damage. What's the thinking about mitigating those effects?
Yeah, the question is from someone who really says he believes very much in wind power and solar and stuff like that, but he's also a bird lover and concerned about the talk about wind turbines killing birds. The story here is that when California got into the wind market, they built turbines on a lattice structure, full of places where the birds can roost. And the blades were small and they turn like a kitchen blender. So you've got the birds roosting, they're going upwards, and the blades are small, so that you've got the blender effect and they're not a big wind effect. So they had a high bird rate kill. The modern turbines are enormous. They're made of concrete smooth structure, so there's nowhere for the birds to sit. And the blades are turning, 20 revolutions per minute. So, every 3 seconds a blade is passing. And the industry, there's been so much studying of this done, and the data is that it's 1 bird killed per turbine per year. Right. Now, if you sell it to a bird lover, they can still get upset until you ask the bird lover, does he have a cat? I mean, cats are killing far more birds than wind turbines, and any office block with the lights left on at night is killing more birds because they fly right into the offices, right? So it's down to that level. So that's wind turbines. And the other factor coming in is that what's interesting is that the turbines themselves create turbulence in the wind. They've done experiments with butterflies on a miniature scale, and you try throwing a butterfly or a feather at a turbine, and the wind currents, you cannot do it. They're pushed off to the side because the turbulence pushes the air currents around the edge. Now, the tidal thing is an interesting one because now you've got the same turbines under the water. They're turning at the same speed, interestingly. They're also slow. So every 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, whoosh, 1, 2, 3, whoosh. The fish can flow through that, no problem. You're now talking just about the whales and the large marine mammals. And what you've got to look at is to the extent to which they know to avoid it, like they'll steer clear from rudders. They don't swim into propellers on ships. They're put off by the noise and the general disturbance. There will be some vibrations coming from this. I think that's weird, right? And it may be you have to put a grid up around it to protect them initially to see how it works. But we don't know for tidal energy yet because there's only 2 gone into the water. We're just starting to do this. But an important question. Yeah. Anyone else? Otherwise, we'll call it a day. I do have my books for sale at the front there. And I have a green flyer there. For any of you who are really exploring the cosmic stuff I was doing at the end, I'm actually doing a 5-day workshop on a retreat center on Cortes Island in British Columbia on the concept of what I call syntropy, which is basically the belief that spirit is part of evolution, that there's a spiritual evolution happening, and that whereas entropy is the tendency of matter to lose organization, according to second law of thermodynamics, syntropy is the tendency of all spiritual life to seek wholeness. And I believe that's a principle that's applying in the whole universe. So I'm doing a 5-day workshop on that. If you're really interested and want to come all the way to California and spend some money, pick up a brochure. But thanks for being here and thanks for listening. Okay.